So good morning, everybody, and welcome. My name is Mary Benton. I am the pro bono partner here at Alston and Bird, and so I'm pleased to welcome you all to Alston and Bird today. I'm standing right in front of the guests of honor, and so we're thrilled to have y'all with us today, particularly on a Monday morning, very early in the rain. So thank you all for being here. I'm also a board member of Georgia Appleseed, and so proud of this organization and the work that they do. And Alston and Bird is so pleased to be a supporter of the work, and particularly in juvenile justice. So I'm glad y'all are here, and I'm going to turn it over to Michael Waller, our executive director.
Thank you, Mary. It's a real pleasure to be here, and thank you to Alston and Bird for having us. I also want to thank our sponsors, so Taylor English, King & Spalding, and Kilpatrick Stockton. We couldn't do what we do without your support, so thank you. Just one quick housekeeping item. We're going to pass around some cards so that you can write down questions that you have for the panel. At the end of the panel discussion, there'll be some time for that, right, Amy? So if you'll pass those up to any person, particularly staff members who have this kind of name tag, they'll get them to us, but otherwise you can bring it up to Mary or me. It will be right here. It's always a real joy to see a lot of familiar faces, and there's lots of familiar faces in this room. It's also exciting to see new faces. So thank you for coming, and thank you for joining us today. I think you'll find that the Georgia Appleseed community is a warm, welcoming community. It's also very exciting. People are very passionate about child welfare, and I think you'll enjoy being part of the group, and we'll find something for you to do. So just come and let us know that you're new and that you'd like to find a way to support the organization, and we'll make sure to point you in the right direction. For the new folks, I'll share a little bit about our work. Georgia Appleseed is a nonpartisan, nonprofit law center committed to advancing equity for all of Georgia's children. We do that by keeping kids in school, in healthy homes, and out of the criminal justice system. We were founded in 2005. There are probably a few people in this room who are around back then. Was anyone been with us since 2005? So Mary, okay. Neil, right, Neil. And Alston and Bird and some of our sponsors have been with us since the beginning too. We engage tough policy issues to make children's lives better. That's just what we do. And we do this by connecting directly with vulnerable and underrepresented children, by growing the community of advocates for children across the state, and by driving important systems change, law and policy change in Georgia. This morning is our 4th annual Justice Conversations. This is really exciting. Every year, we invite Georgia's most influential federal or state jurists to come and talk to us about pressing legal issues. And there's been a range of issues. We've talked about accountability courts. We've talked about the impact of political thinking or political influence on judicial decision-making. And we've talked about the state's behavioral health system. This year's panel is a unique cross-section of our judicial system, discussing the court's role in child welfare. So to get the program started, I'm going to hand things over to our MC, and I'm going to introduce her, Jessica McKinney. Jessica is Vice President and General Counsel at Westrock. She's a former GE executive. She's an alumna of Kilpatrick Stockton and what is now Copeland, Steigerwalt, and Lovell, also Emory Law and Georgetown University. Most importantly, though, she's a Georgia Appleseed board member. Jessica is very close to some of the issues that we're going to talk about today. And that's not just because she's part of the Georgia Appleseed community. It's because she's also a proud parent of 2 beautiful, adorable foster children, Jasmine and Cameron. So if you're lucky and you ask nicely, she might show you a baby picture later on.
Be careful. Show more than one.
So Jessica, thank you. I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you.
Hey, good job. Good morning, everyone. Glad that you're here. This is going to be a fantastic conversation. And I wanted to thank the panelists for coming. We're excited about this. I just want to take a few seconds to talk about how I got involved in Georgia Appleseed. And I'm not going to date myself, but if you start doing the math, you'll be able to do it. So this conversation today really piggybacks on one of the core Georgia Appleseed tenets, which is keeping kids in school. right? And Georgia Appleseed started in 2005, and in 2006, we partnered with the Just Georgia Coalition, right? And I remember at the time in 2007, our very first executive director, I was at Kilpatrick at the time, and she said, Jessica, I just need you for about 5 hours to go ahead and do some interviews of stakeholders to help us with this rewrite of the Juvenile Justice Code, which hadn't been rewritten in 40 years, right? There were subparts B, C, and D, and J, and they cross-referenced everything. It was a hot mess, as my mother would call it. And so I said, sure, Sharon, no problem. That was in 2007. I am still here today on the board. I was on the board of our under 40 partner with us before I, had that illustrious title of reaching that milestone. And I will say, one of the things that is amazing about this organization, if you haven't had an opportunity to get involved, is we take the community's voice, right? We take the community's voice and we transfer it into actionable systemic change, okay? I say, if anybody's ever asking, well, what does Georgia Seed do? We are Atlanta Legal Aid for the state, not for a person, for the system. Okay. So please get involved. Just Georgia and that coalition. It took a long time. It was from 2006. The first rewrite of the legislation was 2009. It was bipartisan. It didn't get passed until 2013. So that's the other thing about Georgia Appleseed that's wonderful, is we are like a dog with a bone, right? We will continue to work this and continue to work it because it's for the betterment of all of Georgia. And it took 6,500 hours of pro bono time, not just from lawyers. So please do get involved. There's a sign up outside if you need it. I'm sure Liz will take your name for some involvement. But thank you very much, panelists, as you come here to kind of help us continue in that juvenile justice discussion. And thank you, everybody, for being here.
And hello, everybody. It is my great pleasure to welcome you this morning and to introduce our panelists. I am Amy Steigerwalt. I am on the board. I also, in my other life, am a professor of political science over at Georgia State University. So if you haven't yet, please vote tomorrow. I don't care who you vote for. I would just like you to turn out and vote and take all your friends to vote, because civic engagement is good, but also because it relates exactly to what we are talking about today. And so right to my left, we have Presiding Judge Renata Turner from the Fulton County Juvenile Court. Sitting next to her is Justice Charlie Bethel of the Georgia Supreme Court. On his But we've got Presiding Judge Yvette Miller of the Georgia Court of Appeals. And finally, I am honored to be joined today by Judge Amanda Heath of the Superior Court in the Augusta Judicial Circuit. Needless to say, no one wants to hear from me. You want to hear from them. They all have tremendously terribly important bios. There are so many firsts of this group that it is hard to overstate. So please make sure that you read this and know exactly who that you're getting to learn from today. But I want to get straight to the actual conversation. So thank you all for joining me and letting me get to drive this. So let's sort of start at the beginning. What do each of you see, given, which I think is important, your status as kind of the last in a very long process, right? By the time, in many ways, children get to you, they've gone through a bunch of other things, right? They're now in the system, particularly for my appeals court judges. You're seeing them after they've, right, already gone through a trial. They've gone through other things. And so what do you possibly see as places of concern that need to be addressed to stop children from entering the system altogether? I was going to say, why don't we start with sort of Judge Turner, Presiding Judge Turner, you see them first.
Right, I see them first. And it's my goal or job to stop them from having to go further up the judicial chain. I think that when we get them in juvenile court, we want to send them back even further. Where does the solutions lie? And they lie in their homes, in their communities, in their schools. When they get to us, it's almost, I won't say it's too late, but it's certainly a time when we need to turn them back to those resources that will really help them stay on the right path. And so if the communities are not healthy, if the families are not healthy, then it's going to be difficult for the schools, which we definitely partner with, and the courts to really fix anything, right? Our mission is to rehabilitate children and families. And in order to do that, we need a lot of resources on the front end, the back end, all around, in order to really turn things around for children and families.
I will jump in with a preliminary point too. I want to thank Georgia Appleseed for hosting this event, for having us here, and certainly Alston and Byrd as well. And I know we're not going to do a juvenile justice reform sort of expose for a lot of reasons. My brain can't remember that far back now at this point, even though it took forever to get right now. It's past. But I will just say this for those that are guests or that are sort of new to Georgia Appleseed. One of the things that's important as somebody who is a former legislator is credibility. Georgia Appleseed has credibility in the process. And so if you're looking at places where you can invest your time to make an impact, you already are connecting with somebody who, when you show up at the Capitol, when you show up at various places around the state where policy is made, you have credibility in the title. And so I want to say kudos to Georgia Appleseed in that respect, but also just, everybody's busy. And so if you're thinking about how to allocate your time, this is a place where that work has already been done on your behalf, which also puts pressure on you to keep that credibility. But in any event, you can come into that. I'll just tell a short story, hopefully short, on that. When I was a law clerk for Judge Pannell on the district court, the first case he tried when I was his law clerk was a massive drug ring. And one of the defendants was no longer a juvenile, but only just no longer a juvenile. And when the story and the evidence came into court, it turns out that he had lived my life, but in a different world. I grew up in Dalton, Georgia. My family was in the commercial carpet business. And so in summertime and in spring break, and whenever I wasn't in school or on the ball field, I worked in the plant because that's what we did. He worked in his dad's drug business. Mm-hmm. And so when you ask me, what do we need? It starts so soon. And I think Judge Turner is right. It's home, it's church, it's family, that things that frankly are very difficult for government to reach in an effective way. Doesn't mean we don't continue to advocate and work in that space. But he was doing the only thing that seemed obvious in his world. And so how do we break through those barriers? Western society's been dealing with that a long time, but that's where the need to me is finding a way to break through and say, hey, there's another path that's available, and making it look both attractive and viable.
Well, I guess I'll just piggyback on that and say, again, thank you to Georgia Appleseed, because you guys do a fantastic job of advocating on behalf of these children and these families. And you have credibility not only with the Georgia legislature and the governor, but with the community. And I think that just speaks volumes. But I don't know how many of you just happened to be watching Sunday Morning yesterday. And that was just a sobering piece. It just, I was sitting with my mother and I just really wanted to cry because I didn't see the beginning, but the part that I saw that grabbed me was talking about this mother who had her parental rights had been terminated, and she was doing everything she could to regain the custody of her child. And these cases, because I just had a wonderful upbringing, just, straight out of Mayberry, via Macon, Georgia, and hardworking mother and father, and, stressed education, and, do the right thing. And just to see how some of these people live, and to be in my position and not be able to help them. I have just cried, I don't know how many tears, just thinking about my job on the Court of Appeals and my inability to make a difference. Some of my proudest moments have been when I have looked at a file and seeing, say it was a delinquency case, and say, please forgive me, juvenile court and superior court judges, because you all do a fantastic job in this state. But if there's ever an error, and listen, we all make them, we're all just human. If the judge did not cite the conclusions of law and the factual basis, you know, sometimes I celebrate the fact that I can vacate and remand and send it back and say, please look at this a little bit more carefully. Because I just have a sense that, you know, the children don't have lawyers, the parents don't have lawyers, there's no education, there's no resources. You know, those cases are so different than my custody cases, which can be difficult. I mean, everybody wants to talk about the best interest of the child, but we have got to put the resources where they need to be. We should not be charging these people, these parents, child support. I just can't imagine. You know, maybe I'm speaking out of turn. I don't know. We got some Supreme Court justices, and we've got the, we've got, you know, you people may know better, but back when I was an ADA, one of the first things I had to do was collect child support from deadbeat dads. These parents are not deadbeats. Mm-hmm. They need that money so that they can pay for the child's toy or education or whatever it is, you know, get to their parenting classes and keep their jobs. I don't think they need to be fined child support and pay child support in the traditional sense of the word. I think this system needs to be looked at. You know, we're about to have a new legislature, and we'll have a governor with a brand new term. And this may be a very good time for Georgia Appleseed to step up, you know, what you guys already do a fantastic job of doing, that is advocating for our system, because the law has precluded the Court of Appeals from doing something in so many of these cases. You know, and I see the situation, and I'm just, you know, you just kind of suffer in silence, and you sort of feel like a rubber stamp. I don't know if Judge Marco would agree, but, you know, Justice Bethel remembers too. You know, you sometimes feel like a rubber stamp, and you don't want to be a rubber stamp. I always want to stand for what is right and for what is good and to do the right thing. But you know, I've been told on occasion, not a lot, by the Supreme Court, you know, you stay in your place. Now, sort of know my place, but you know, but in this room, we can all realize that it's so important to advocate for children and parents, and to make certain that our system works for the greater good, because these are the people that we see in the grocery store line and in the voting line, and you know, we want to be able to have, you know, meaningful conversations about things that are good.
And I just want to add in that what everyone has hit on, that we know the socializing agents are gone. You know, either it was through church, it was through school, or through the home. And those structures are decaying, and the family was really that last stronghold. So now, as everyone's alluded to, they come to court, and we're expected to have that magic wand. You know, every judge has a magic wand, and we wish that we did in real life. And I think the key is that you have to meet them where they are. We can't continue to put our standards, you know, what is an A+ parent versus a D parent? That's not what we're here about. Is the child happy, safe, and loved? And I think that sometimes we just lose sight of that and want to bring them to this something that is not attainable, because we're putting our own standards on these families. So I always would, on the juvenile bench, and then as there's those interactions between juvenile court and superior court, as we know, cases are transferred back and forth. The divorce is with me, but the kids are in foster care, and doing those different navigations. But how do we meet them where they are, and doing a better job of that? Because I think we just get caught up in, here's the case plan. Did they check everything off with the case plan? Meet them where they are. How do we get the family back to where it needs to be? And I would tell the parents when they would come in, I said, the state of Georgia, I don't want to raise your kids. We believe that being a parent, that is one of the most fundamental things and a fundamental right. And I want to ensure that we've done everything we can to put those resources in place so you can raise your own children, because you can do it better than we could ever do.
It's always lovely when your panelists sort of lead naturally into where you wanted to take the conversation. And so one of the things this review all are talking about, and to sort of bring it almost to sort of things that are going on, is talking about sort of what is the role, right? We can sort of talk about family and community, but we can also sort of move to institutions. So the role of schools a lot of times are playing a role. As many of you likely know, unfortunately over Thanksgiving, there was a 12-year-old who was shot and killed at Atlantic Station. And one of the things I was struck by in the press conference that they held afterwards was the Atlanta Public Schools Superintendent, Lisa Herring, really sort of made this plea of please reach out, right? Particularly parents, and let us know at the schools, let the teachers know if you need help so that we can try to get the resources that are necessary so that we don't get to this stage. And so the question I want to sort of ask to all of you is, where does this all fit in, right? We've also seen the legislature just passed a landmark, right, omnibus bill that will go into effect in January, dealing with sort of access to mental health services and other behavioral health services. And so what is the role, for example, of the schools as well as the courts in providing such services, right? What are the types of things that we need the schools to do? I'm going to start actually with Judge Heath, because when we spoke, you mentioned to me sort of a topic that a lot of people don't bring up, which is sex trafficking, and possibly sort of the role of the schools in identifying that. And so I sort of wanted to start there, and if the rest of you could.
Yes. So when I first came on the juvenile court bench and dealing with truancy, children in need of services, and not understanding what I was seeing, why is this child continuing to run away? Why is this child not in school? What's going on? And also dispelling that myth that, to be trafficked, I got to be taken to a foreign country or taken across the state. Trafficking can happen right there in your own community, and you come home every night, you're still being trafficked. If you're being used for sexual services and you're an underage person, even if you're an adult, you're being trafficked. And so I had to change my perspective and just think about, okay, are they just running just to run? Typically not. Children are not just going to run from home or not want to go to school just because. There's always an underlying issue. And so I had to go get specific training. What is this commercial sex trafficking? What is it? How does it work? How does it operate? And I think that the biggest thing that I learned as far as from the judicial system is, this is a whole different group of children that are being abused and neglected, and just that psychological trauma that has been occurring to this youth. And so how do I not become the new pimp? Like, this is where you need to be, this is where you're going to stay, it's what you're going to wear, it's what you're going to do, which is just what they left from. So I had to look at it a different way and like, okay, we can't handle a child that is dependent due to being trafficked the same way I would with another child dealing with physical abuse or some other type of neglect. How can I make them a part of the process, because they were just in a situation where someone told them when to get up, when to go, what to do, what to wear, all those different things. And sadly, in our system, we do the same thing. Okay, you can't do that with your hair. Okay, you can't wear that. You can't do this. So to be very specific about the uniqueness of that population. And I think that I felt that it starts in the schools. How can we teach the teachers and actually the other kids? They're on TikTok. They see it first. Really, they're the other children in the school kind of know who's doing what and who's interacting with who. So how can we just educate our children about interacting with strangers on the internet and what are the best practices, and that everyone that's on your TikTok page is not your new best friend, and don't go to a random party and end up in a situation. So I definitely was glad to see that there's a push, I think, this across our state. Like, how can we get our teachers involved? Because we put so much on our teachers, but they see so much, and they may not know what they're seeing either. But how can we educate the teachers and also the other children in the school? Like, hey, I think something's going on with my friend, but I don't know who to say or what to say. I went to speak to one school and I was telling them about sex trafficking, and a young lady came up to me afterwards and was like, yeah, this person keeps following me on my Instagram, and I told them to stop following me. And I'm like, well, did you tell your parent? And sadly, they didn't feel comfortable. Well, they told their parent, and the parent was like, oh, okay. And I said, was there another adult that you trust? And like, I trust teacher A. And I said, you know what, let's walk to teacher A right now and let them know what's happening. And I was like, I'm so proud of you that they tried to block them. They did everything that they knew to do as a child. But again, clearly my, red flags are going off inside of me, but I don't want to freak out the child. But I'm like, let's handle this quickly. So, that's when I realized that, the children just need to be educated too, because they're the best conduits of information to each other in more ways than whatever new thing they create in the last 30 seconds. They can get the information out there and help people. So.
Presiding Judge Miller, I guess, to what degree are you, right, at the Court of Appeals, right, so it's sort of up there, dealing also with the schools or having to rely on the schools, or is it sort of too late at that point, I guess, by the time it gets to you?
Well, being the daughter of just an outstanding school teacher who taught for over 35 years, I'm always thinking about the school system. And so when I get these cases, we are sort of distant and aloof at the Court of Appeals, but I've got an excellent staff of some really smart lawyers and a good administrative assistant. And so we talk about these cases because I'm a talker, and I just can't just sit and read. I got to talk about it. So I discuss it with my staff and some of the other judges on my panel. And so I think there's definitely a place for the educators. And I really think we got to make sure the educators handle number one, truancy, which you guys have piggybacked on that and taken it to a great extent. I mean, that's the key. If you can keep these kids in school, you can keep them out of crime and off the streets. But also we've got to do something about bullying. Cyberbullying and bullying in person. And we've got to deal with social media. So the educators have got to deal with those three things. I see that underlined in some of the cases that I deal with. And I think if we can come up with tools to reach the kids through those mechanisms, that I think we can do a lot to start to eradicate crime. Because if you looked at the backgrounds of those people that were involved, that did the crime over in Atlantic Station, you would find some of those key ingredients being in their backgrounds, because it's just how bad things start. You don't go to school, you a victim of bullying, you're into social media, and it's one big sort of quagmire that I think that if we focus on, we'll be able to really do something. And let me say something. I really want to see the juvenile court judges and the Superior Court judges be even freer. Obviously, they've got to follow the law just like we do, freer to sort of go behind the scenes, and because they can then, educate the legislators or the lobbyists, whereas we don't get to question the key parties. But because we've had these other backgrounds before we came to the Court of Appeals, for example, we sort of have a rich view and lots of thoughts about ways to make the system better.
Well, which leads very naturally, I think, into, so Judge Turner, I know that you are the head of the School Pathways Project. And to maybe talk a little bit about that, of an initiative that is in place in trying to address some of these issues.
Right. So the School Pathways Project was developed to stop the school to prison pipeline. We know, I always say that, things that we used to get sent to the principal's office for, children were being charged with a delinquent act, sent in court. And then once you start getting in the justice system, you can spiral and end up, with a future in the justice system. So we partner with APS, Atlanta Public Schools, and Fulton Schools to develop MOUs that certain infractions would not come to court anymore, that they will be handled administratively. And so it worked. I think we had, I can't remember the exact numbers, around a 35% decrease in the number of delinquencies coming from the courts, which is a good thing. And, it would have been very easy to say, okay, we accomplished that and, check off, we can write a nice article about it and we're done. But I'm very proud of everyone involved in my committee, including Georgia Appleseed. Like, no, we want to keep at this. We want to keep reducing the numbers. And even if the numbers are reduced, we want to really be a support to each other. And so how can we create restorative justice programs to actually help kids understand what they're doing and how it impacts the entire community? And so we're still meeting right now. One of the issues we're focused on is how to integrate kids who have been absent, either from extended truancy or they've been in DJJ custody or detained, to better integrate them back into the schools. And I just want to say that, I think that as a society, we have to keep in mind that everyone is not equal in our society. It's a clear divide in Atlanta. I mean, the I-20 is the dividing line, and the Annie Casey Foundation has done a great study about the difference in incomes and job opportunities and transportation and everything north of 20 and south of 20. And if we want to be really one community, we need to make sure that every child in every school has the same resources. We're very aware that in order for us to achieve equity, we can't treat everyone equal, right? So the kids in the south side of Atlanta may need more support, whether it is making sure that they have free after-school programs or transportation to those after-school programs, or more things in the school to support parents who are working 2 or 3 jobs or may have incarceration in back. What do those kids need? And make sure they get that. But if we treat everyone like we're just giving everyone an equal, the equal amount of money or resources, that's not helping the problem. Because some kids have intact families and families with resources and mothers who can be on the PTA board, who are well educated, and they can, change the school around because they're trained and educated to make changes, where we have other parents who are not. And so how do we make them equal? And I think we put a lot of responsibility and obligations on schools now. And we're expecting them to fill the gap that other institutions used to fill. But if we're going to be serious about being one community, one Atlanta, and making sure that all children have the same opportunities, we need to fill in those gaps in those communities, in those areas where there's tremendous deficits.
Thank you. And so Justice Bethel, I did want to ask you, because of course you chair the Justice for Children Committee, about the different initiatives that you're working on there and thoughts that you may have about these things.
Well, so thank you. And to start, I'll just say, in particular, with Judge Heath and Judge Turner, I hope you hear. I don't even want to ask you what your caseload is right now, and either of you.
It's a lot.
But I want you to think about the amount of intellectual and emotional investment that Judge Heath just described in one case. And you talked about not having a magic wand. Judges don't have magic wands. I can confirm they didn't issue me one either. But neither do teachers or principals. And I do think that we look for places where there's high frequency of contact and say that's where the solution, and it may be there. But I want you to think about the 6th grade social science teacher with 30 kids per class for 6 classes, and they're trying to get their classes. How effective a delivery mechanism are they? Not because they don't want to, and certainly not because they don't love their kids, but just because there's 24 hours in a day. And it's a very difficult dynamic. So I think there are examples. I mean, you talked about Justice for Children. One that comes to mind, the state has put significant resources into. It's a little bit different than the juvenile justice issue that we're talking about, but the cold case project. The cold case project, which is sort of sounds like it should be in a detective's office solving crimes, is really about identifying young people in state custody who are, because of all of the metrics that they can follow on these people, they're likely to age out without permanency. And so the state dedicates additional resources, saying someone who ages out without permanency is going to cost us a lot of money. So I mean, in terms of fiscal conservatism, it makes a lot of sense. In terms of just compassion and human care, it also makes a lot of sense because we tend to think that everybody ought to have a home, everybody ought to have a family. And so those two unite, and so you have resources that go there. For me, when I think about what schools' role ought to be, certainly, the resources that are available in school counseling and school system-based counseling, doesn't have to be in school. is certainly an obvious deficit within the system. We ought to have those people who have high frequency of contact identifying people who need services, not being the deliverer of services, because that's not what they were trained to do. It's not what they have the capacity to do, but they need to say, you know, Jessica's got a problem here or a potential problem, and I'm the person who can get them connected to the potential solution. And then you got to have the resources for that. And those are, I mean, limited resources is the nature of human society. So it's always balancing. But my point in the cold case is the return on doing it well is easily demonstrable. So if we find people who are doing it well and we can make the case to the broader society and the broader community, people will adopt what's working. And so there's chicken or the egg, right? How do we demonstrate what works? But people will adopt what's working if you can demonstrate success in those spaces. So,
excellent. So to change gears just a little bit, I wanted to ask all of you about COVID. We, of course, are coming out, we're now sort of switched from pandemic to endemic, but of course we had 2 years there, right? A long period where the courts themselves were closed, we were moved to Zoom, and to sort of ask you about the impacts that had on, right, children who were in the system, right? The issues that were caused that we maybe are still dealing with. And I guess maybe on the flip side, were there any positive changes that you saw come out of it, or maybe innovations that had to be adopted, which may aid us going forward?
I'm going to jump in first for one reason. One, I want to hear their discussion of how it impacted the operation of courts. Only to say something that I think has to always be said in this discussion. And I am quarreling with you, but not in a bad way. Courts were never closed.
Sorry, physically closed.
I understand. I understand that, and it is an important message because we hear that a lot. We see that the amount of effort that Dave Namias and Harold Melton, and then all the way through the system, was invested in ensuring that those critical functions continued can't be understated, and it's a credit. And look, in retrospect, I think that we can see, particularly in some of our probate and juvenile court judges, we lost lives probably because people were dedicated to making sure work got done. That's the reality, and that's a credit to our profession. It's a credit to the judicial branch. It's a tragedy, but it's also something that we ought to, as people who believe in the rule of law and people who believe in our system, be proud to say we found ways to make sure the most critical things got done, and then built out from there. So certainly in my world, which was already removed in the judicial branch process, the impacts were less, and I think the probably long-term adjustments to the system, were also less, but probably will have an impact on our operations. I mean, virtual meetings, everything being circulated in a digital format. Nobody's passing papers around anymore in our world, and so I think from an efficiency standpoint, those are going to be benefits. But obviously, on the front lines, and I don't want to. Judge Miller probably has some thoughts on this too, but these folks know that court still happened, and I'm thankful for it, and I appreciate it.
Mea culpa on that.
Yes, court did happen.
Physically closed.
Right. And I would say one of the positives is that it actually allowed parents to be more present for the hearings, because they had to come for that cattle call at 9 o'clock and then take off work and, miss appointments. They could log into Zoom at the time of their hearing and they were engaged. And I actually talked to the commissioner of Department of Juvenile Justice, Commissioner Oliver. He said that actually more kids got to have these virtual visits. And so that was actually a plus, because they could, I missed my room, or I could see my dog. I could see things that they could not normally see with a visit. So that was one of the positive things. Although I'm getting, a little annoyed with having to tell people please don't drive during the hearing. Please be dressed. Please get out of the bathroom. All those things. That's the downside. But there was a recent, some of you may have seen it. There's a recent study that said the teenage brain aged about 3 years over the pandemic. These are all kids that, the lack of the social interactions had an effect on the teenage brain. And we know the teenage brain is developing, they're making bad decisions because it's a brain, they change, but also, the fact that COVID actually aged their brains made me also think about the kids, again, who have trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma. And now they have a brain that is aged even more. It helps explain why things seem to be very crazy. I mean, things are crazy for all of us. Who was that? Someone said it had a skillet analogy that we're all, one of our school social workers talked about how every COVID put us all in this skillet and we're all, teetering on, a little craziness. But those of us who have poverty and homelessness and community violence and personal violence, they're bouncing off the walls right now on top of COVID. And so that helps explains, I think it had an impact on all of us, but certainly on our most vulnerable populations, it's really affected them.
Definitely. And so just before, remember, if anybody has any questions, to please write them down on those adorable little cards and pass them up so I can read them out.
I was just going to say the real not so secret weapon of COVID at the Court of Appeals and frankly at the Supreme Court was technology and throughout the whole judicial system. And so I have just been very proud of the fact that back in 2008, when I was elected chief of the Court of Appeals, I made it my goal to bring e-filing to the Court of Appeals, and together with Justice Milton and Dave Namias, the way that they set up the commission to make certain that we were prepared for future pandemics and whatnot, we were able to operate, seamlessly at the Court of Appeals and at the Supreme Court. And, that was that gave us really a good sense about not being derelict in our duties and being open, but being remote. And of course, the Zoom hearings have really worked well, very seamlessly. And, lots of things came out of the chat rooms initially in the Zoom sessions, but, we were really able to get our work done. We are now seeing an increase though in our caseload, which we are saying is now the COVID cases. And so we always expedited these juvenile court cases. So we're continuing to try to expedite those cases, but technology has, I think technology frankly saved the world, but it's certainly saved the justice system in Georgia.
As Justice Bethel said, I was on the juvenile court bench during COVID, and we didn't have a choice. We couldn't, if a child's being abused and neglected, before a judge within X amount of hours. So we had to pivot very, very quickly, and very thankful for our Supreme Court, Court of Appeals, everyone putting those things in place so that we could continue to function and do what we need to do to protect the children. Personally, I was in court every day. I still went to court every day. As Justice Bethel said, we lost some really great social workers during this time that were trying to do their job. And so it was a very intense emotionally and figuring out how to continue to serve youth, no matter the abuse, neglect, being trafficked. We just could not not do anything. And I think that I'm glad Justice Bethel brought that out, that not just juvenile court, all the courts, we still had to push forward, move forward, figure out how to still get the cases moved. People in jail, we don't want them just sitting there, just to sit there and not have their day in court, and to move what we could. As far as the good and the bad that came out of it, like for me, so I'm kind of a unique millennial judge. So I was very excited that we just totally, the things that we can do now, we had judges on the bench that they didn't even check their email. Okay. There was not even email happening. So to go from, I don't check email, that, oh, now you want me to have a hearing on a computer, total brain explosion emoji right there. So for me, it was interesting that I was the lead person to help them figure out, well, how do we do this? How do we put people on mute? How do you do these different things? So that was a really interesting interaction for me, being a younger judge on the bench and trying to help the other courts and figuring out, how do we deal with this new frontier? And it also exposed the gaps in our community. Internet access. Like I said, I still had to go to the physical courthouse and have my courtroom open because I realized a lot of our parents, they don't have a smartphone. They didn't have, or if they do have some type of smartphone or device, access to internet, the public libraries are closed, all these different things. So it's like, whoa, Augusta, second largest city in Georgia, and we don't have the broadband to do what we need to do for these children and families. So I think it just kind of opened up also some new different issues that need to be addressed to try to ensure that we all have the same access. So good things and things we still got to work on as a community.
Yes, and so we have a question, which I had not on there, but certainly something of importance to Georgia Appleseed is the fact that Georgia law actually currently requires, for example, the superior courts convene school attendance and school climate committees. And so to sort of talk to you, and this is probably, maybe to start with Judge Heath, so how do we ensure that these are happening? Who should participate, right? Are there things that others in the community that Georgia Appleseed can do to help support those committees in achieving their goals?
So when I was on the juvenile court bench, I didn't even know it existed, but it's in our statute. I mean, it is so clear. You have the school climate committees, and I think the greatest power that we have as judges, we are the conveners. So actually it's through the superior court bench. They're the ones that are to convene these meetings. There's not really particular how often to meet, at least once. And it lists all the different entities that should be involved in those committees. So it's very clearly laid out. I think that is an education issue, trying to make sure that the Superior Court are aware. I think sometimes we appoint the juvenile court judges and we're done with it. We'll look at it again in 4 years. So I think just trying to and make the Superior Court judges feel comfortable in being the conveners. I think that some of the judges are more old school, that you stay separate from the community once you come on the bench. And so also trying to encourage that, as a part of your role as a judge is to be a convener. You're not here to direct on how services get done and things of that nature, but at least to bring people to the table. As you get that letter from the judge, it's like, oh, this must be an important meeting. And not to send my representative, but to have the actual, school superintendent there, whoever's over your behavioral health entities in your area. I mean, it's a very detailed list. And again, coming on the bench, Georgia Appleseed actually came out to try to assist us in figuring out, at that time, Judge Brown was our chief judge, and trying to figure out, how do we get this done and bringing everyone to the table, because we all know about the silos and we're all doing this over here, this over there. So it's just a way to bring all these different entities that are right there in our community to, again, take the pressure off of our schools, take the pressure off of everything needs to be done through the schools and the teachers, but yet we have all these entities. I think something really odd about Augusta, we have like one of the top per capita nonprofits in the state, which is, I was like, really? So we have a lot of different nonprofits, a lot of different entities doing a lot of things for children. But again, how can we not duplicate services? How can we join forces and make sure that we're doing things in an efficient manner? So again, I just think it's as far as the Superior Court Judges Council, just making sure that we're educating them, making them feel comfortable that you're not violating any type of judicial ethics, you're not doing anything of that nature. Like, this is a part of, it's in the code. It's in the code. We have the power and authority to do it. And again, if we start there, like Judge Turner spoke about, we've got to start where they are. We've got to start in the homes. When you come into the judicial system, our hands are tied a lot of times on what we can do, especially at this level. I think juvenile court, we get a little creative on what we can do with the youth and the families that we serve. But again, just getting it out there that this is something that's a part of what we need to do. And even if we want to include our juvenile court judges, like, okay, you convene it. And then I appoint Judge Turner. I want you to continue to run with this. Y'all need to meet quarterly, report back to me. I think we forget being on the bench, the power that we have to convene people.
So another one of the questions that we have from the audience is, which sort of, I think, speaks to a lot of what we've been talking about, sort of this issue that in many ways, it's not just siloed, but it is difficult to find out information sometimes about sort of how different pieces work and different players in the process. And particularly, I think parents. So there's questions about how can parents be educated on the appellate process, right? Particularly when perhaps their court-appointed attorney doesn't tell them about it, right? Where are there resources to be able to go find out what comes next, what's happening, right? What needs to be done?
Well, let's see, we have a pamphlet, at least we used to sort of back in the day, I haven't seen it lately, but there is a pamphlet that is designed to be used by the public to sort of give you a guide, a citizen's guide to the appellate process in the Court of Appeals. So I would definitely say let's consult that brochure, but it's not tailored to the juvenile justice situation. So that may be something that we need to look at. I'll take that back to see if we need to come up with something more tailored so that, the juvenile justice parents or the people that are involved in family law can sort of collaborate and assist the court in terms of making lay people aware of how the appellate process works.
And I'll add in, I mean, this is a need probably throughout our justice system. How do you make it make sense and be transparent for the public at large? Justice Colvin chairs the Access to Justice Committee of the Judicial Council, and I formerly did following Justice Benham. And an ongoing project of that group is, trying to advocate on behalf of uniformity of forms in our trial courts. Because if you pull a form that the Gwinnett Probate Court has prepared, and it's wonderful and beautiful, and you take it to another county, they may say, we don't use that form. And so both in the trial courts and the appellate process, trying to have something that's transparent and accessible to parents and the general public, I think would be helpful. And so I think there's different ways to plug in that initiative. And then also I think it's a function of, I think the question said, well, parents don't have lawyers, or their lawyers maybe didn't tell them. Well, if their lawyers didn't tell them, we got a real problem. Right? But if they don't have representation, then how do they find that? And I think that there is room for resources to point them there. And I do think that the Court of Appeals has some good literature out there on their process. And I believe it's on your website, but I'm not certain about that.
Yeah,
but
I think it is on our website.
There are some things accessible in that way.
And the code rewrite, one of the things it did, it made sure that certainly every child has an attorney, parents have attorneys. So they have access to attorneys. And hopefully, like, as you said, they're doing their job and informing them.
Yes. One of the audience members wanted to know whether or not American Indian law has any bearing on children who are of Native descent who are in Georgia's system.
Yeah, there's a whole, it's called ICWA. I can't remember what the acronym stands for.
Indian Child Welfare Act.
Yeah, Indian Child Welfare Act. That's what it is. And so, yeah, if there is, we have to access in every dependency case, is this child of Native American descent? And if they are, then there's a whole nother set of rules and processes to make sure that the tribe knows if they can be reunited with someone in the tribe, that is happening. And so, I think there are probably more equal cases in North Georgia. Every now and then we will get one here. But yeah, there are certain rules and laws to protect children who are of Native American descent.
And actually, I think that it's
The
Supreme Court right now. It's I don't want to say on the chopping block, but that's basically where we're at. Is this something that's going to continue to be mandated and protected, again, due to our country's history with our Native populations and the assimilation tactics? And so that's why it is mandated in the juvenile world at the first preliminary protection hearing, is this an Indian child? And then what did you do? You can't just say, oh, yes, no, okay, well, tell me more about how did you come to this? And it's not just, okay, I'm looking at this kid, I think they might be. It's like every child,
Right.
You ask the question, you got to have it on the record, ask the question, and the department will put on the record what did they do to come up with the answer they're providing to the court. But I think it's something to definitely keep our eye on. It's percolated all the way to our U.S. Supreme Court, and I think it might be in this next term of court that it will be argued and decided.
Yeah, and having grown up in Dalton, it's not an insignificant number of people that have, particularly for Dalton, a Cherokee Nation heritage, and in their ancestry. I mean, the interesting thing about the ICWA and some of those other issues is that for the vast majority of those people, there is no existing connectivity to the nation, to the Cherokee Nation, and so when they get the question, well, is there a possibility of connecting a tribe? They know no one that's a part of that world, and so it can be a very complicated process. I think there's a lot of interest in seeing what I honestly think that there's probably been a lot of interest for a long time in Congress actually coming back and saying, what does today look like? Because what we put in place was responsive to some really horrific things that were happening in our country, that those things aren't happening anymore, which doesn't mean there aren't problems and there aren't issues, but as is often the case, Congress has not revisited any of it in the ensuing years. Yeah.
Excellent. And so because we're reaching sort of the end, I want to sort of ask a final question. I'm going to put all of you on the spot a little bit, but to also put everybody in the room on the spot, which is this, right? Everyone is here because clearly they have an interest and an investment in this issue, right? Of ensuring that we have all of Georgia's children thriving, right? Whether you yourself are a parent or you just know other children or you were a child. And so you would like to ensure that the children coming after you are coming. And so what do you all think are the most important things that the people in this room can do to help achieve that goal, right? What are some things that we all can go from here and do and look into and try to help with that can help sort of make that change and to maybe even address some of the issues that you all were bringing up, whether it's, in the community, in the schools, et cetera?
Well, I would like to speak to those that are the attorneys in the room. And I think that, we have our day jobs, and then we always talk about pro bono, the State Bar of Georgia about pro bono and things of that nature. And we volunteer in various different ways. And I always try to encourage people that, as attorneys, we have a very specific skill set that other people can't volunteer to do. And so if you can find the time to volunteer your legal acumen, and since we're attorneys, we think, oh, well, I don't practice in that area. I don't do juvenile court law. I don't do those type of things. We need lawyers. I'm literally, as soon as on the phone, can someone come represent this child? Can someone, delinquency, dependency, we're not going to throw you to the wolves, but to just consider to be on that appointed attorney list, to consider how can I assist with school justice partnerships and dealing with the tribunals. There's so many youth that go to the tribunals, no representation, and just get totally railroaded. I would take some of those cases when I was in private practice, and I was shocked on the process. And I was like, wow, if I was just a parent and I have my child and this tribunal board's telling me your child's going to be expelled for the rest of the school year, and that's what it is, I don't have any type of recourse against that. So again, in the tribunal setting or actually with the juvenile court, sometimes we just need someone to be guarding that light for a child. That's it can be emotionally intensive, but as far as legally, not that hard hitting, but still just to have that person that can advocate and say, you know what, she just really wants to be able to go, take a dance class. Is anyone caring about something that they can do for fun? And also ensuring that they're getting the services and behavioral health treatment, things of that nature, but just to take on one of those cases. So I just want to encourage, if there's a way that you can, and just connect with your local juvenile court. A lot of the juvenile courts have certain requirements that they want you to do. Again, we don't just throw you in there, and give you like a little breakdown on how the courts work, but to not be intimidated by it. I think a lot of private attorneys and lawyers stay away from juvenile court, like, oh, that's a whole other world. I don't understand the language. I don't even, as one of my colleagues said, no one is found guilty in juvenile court. No one's ever found guilty. They're adjudicated delinquent. It's a whole other language, but don't be intimidated by it. And if, again, you have a specific, unique skill set that other people cannot volunteer to use for the community. So I want to encourage y'all. And again, Georgia Appleseed is a great resource. And again, they'll train you up too very well.
I think I'd like to also urge the attorneys to consider volunteering to represent some of these children, because they would benefit greatly from your expertise. And other than that, I would love for Georgia Appleseed to sort of work with the justice system and maybe the Supreme Court through the Access to Justice Commission, or I'm not certain the exact proper place, but I would love to see a partnership forged maybe more officially between the juvenile court and the superior courts, so that they could work together with these children and the whole justice system, and make certain that every new juvenile court judge knows. And see, many of our juvenile court judges have also become superior court judges, and we need to arm them to specially help us. You know, they could informally advocate, or certainly inform and educate the legislature. And I just think now is such a key time for them to work together to better our system. My suggestion.
I want to piggyback on what Judge Heath said and Judge Miller. And I just will ask everyone, whenever you see something on the news about what a kid has done, to start, instead of thinking about what's wrong with them, think about what has happened to them. Why, how is this little baby grown up to be this? And as a society, what can we do more to help him have a better vision of himself? And we need to have better visions of them, first of all, as a society, so that they can have something to see. And so volunteer for organizations such as Georgia Appleseed or Atlanta Volunteer Lawyer. I don't want to start shouting out other nonprofits, but there are a lot of legal communities who are fighting for things like housing, homeless things, all those things that we need at the foundational level. You know, get on those boards, help fight for those type of resources for all of our families.
So I will echo what has been said and try not to repeat it, other than just emphasize for the lawyers in the room. And we are in a place where it's a friendly place. And I thank Alston and Byrd for being that kind of place. If you work somewhere where that's a problem, get your resume ready. Because if you are not in the profession of law with some idea of serving beyond just sort of what's happening in your firm's economic prosperity, you are doing it wrong.
Yes.
And so I just say that now. So having made that point, I will also encourage you to volunteer in other than legal capacities. I guess this is somewhat legal. Find an elementary school that's having a career day and go. We talk about I mean, if you're catching people when they're getting the court, you can help them. They need help. We got to get in before. We got to connect early. So, you know, I won't preach because we don't have that much time, but I mean, at your church, volunteer with little kids in your community centers, go be a coach of youth sports, and just tell the kids that they're really awesome and that you love them and that you're so proud of how hard they're working, whatever they're doing, because that's what they have to hear and that's what they need to hear. And that's what so many of them aren't hearing.
That's right.
And so if you can be that one person for that one person, we're better off than we were. And so are you, right? I mean, you'll get something out of it. So I mean, that would be my takeaway, is just find ways to connect with young people, you know, particularly those who are in places of peril, whatever that looks like where you live, and do it and connect with them. And you know, if it won't work every time. I've got examples in my head of that, but sometimes it will, and it's certainly worth it. And that's, to me, the way we have to steer in the right direction.
Thank you all so very, very much. I am so very pleased with this panel. This was fantastic. So Judge Heath, Presiding Judge Miller, Justice Bethel, and Presiding Judge Turner, thank you so much for spending your time with us. Thank you all for spending your time with us. And I guess to piggyback on what they were also saying, if you get a chance today, thank a teacher.
Yes.
Right. They are out there busting their butts, and on some level, they really are the first ones. And they see, I mean, my child is in school right now, and they're seeing him more than I do half the time, and they're amazing. And I don't know how they do it. I thankfully don't have to deal with anywhere near as many children, and by the time they, things like that, but it's hard. But so thank all of you so very, very much for spending your time and your morning with us, and may you all stay dry the rest of this day.